The alarm was already screaming when I reached the command deck. I had been asleep for exactly 40 minutes. That was all the rest I managed in those days, snatched between duty shifts and strategy briefings, wedged into the small hours between midnight and dawn. My boots were still unlaced when I grabbed the railing at the entrance to the bridge and stared at the holographic map that filled the center of the room like a burning wound. Fleet Admiral Corin Vell was standing over it, his 3 upper limbs clasped behind his broad back, his amber eyes fixed on a blinking point of light at the far edge of the projection. He did not look at me when I entered. He did not need to. Every officer on the bridge was already staring at the same thing. "Report," I said. Commander Dresch, my second, turned from his station. His gray skin had gone pale, which for his species meant he was either cold or frightened. The temperature on the bridge had not changed. "Signal received from the outer monitoring buoys 43 seconds ago," he said. "Unscheduled mass exit from faster-than-light travel. The object is large. Very large. It is not broadcasting any identification frequency." Location? Edge of the Varath corridor, 11 light minutes from our position. I walked to the map. The blinking point sat alone at the end of a long stretch of dark space, far from any established transit lane, far from any colony or way station. Whatever had come out of faster-than-light travel had not done so by accident. The Varath corridor was not a place ships wandered into. You had to know where it was. You had to choose it. "Size estimate?" I asked. Dresch pulled up a secondary screen. Numbers scrolled across it, and I watched his expression change as he read them. "Our instruments are having difficulty with the reading," he said carefully. "What does that mean?" "It means the object is large enough that our long-range scanners are returning inconsistent data. The sensor array was not designed to measure something of that scale at this distance." Admiral Vell finally turned to look at me. In all the years I had served under him, I had never seen that particular expression on his face. It was not anger. It was not the cold authority he wore like armor. It was something quieter and more unsettling than either of those things. "The signal," he said, "is human." I had been a senior tactical officer in the Council's Enforcement Division for 19 years. I had served on 6 different fleets. I had been present at the formal submission of 4 separate star systems that had tried to resist Council authority and failed. I had seen things that most officers never see in a full career. But when Admiral Vell said those words, something moved through my chest that I did not have a name for. The humans. Everyone in the Council's military structure knew about the humans, in the same distant, vaguely contemptuous way that you know about a problem that other people are supposed to handle. They were a young species, relatively speaking. Their home system sat in an unremarkable section of the outer arm of the galaxy, surrounded by a handful of colonized worlds that they had reached through a combination of reckless determination and sheer brute stubbornness. They had made first contact with the wider galactic community roughly 3 generations ago, and that first contact had not gone well for anyone. The early reports described them as aggressive, territorial, and almost incomprehensibly resilient. A survey team from the Prelic Confederation had made the mistake of attempting to claim one of their outer moons as unclaimed territory. The humans had responded by sending a single ship, a vessel that the Prelic had considered laughably small, and that ship had somehow managed to disable 2 Prelic cruisers before being forced to retreat. The incident had been quietly settled before it became a formal conflict, but the story had circulated through Council military channels for years afterward as an amusing curiosity. After that, the Council had kept its distance from human space, not out of fear, but out of the same reasoning a careful gardener applies to a rosebush. Humans were thorny. They were not worth the trouble. They occupied a relatively small section of the galaxy and showed no signs of expanding beyond it. The easiest policy was to leave them alone and let them manage their own affairs, while the Council managed everything else. That policy had worked for nearly 2 full generations. It had ended 14 months ago. The incident that broke the quiet was, on its surface, minor. A Council trade vessel had been passing through a region of space that overlapped with what the humans considered their territorial boundary. The humans had hailed the vessel and asked it to alter its course. The captain, a senior merchant by the name of Orvith Cran, had refused on the grounds that the transit lane had been established by Council authority and that human territorial claims in that region had never been formally recognized. The humans had then escorted the Council vessel out of their space by force. No one was harmed, no significant damage was done, but the message was unmistakable, and the Council did not receive messages like that lightly. What followed was 14 months of escalating diplomatic pressure, formal demands, rejected ultimatums, and increasingly sharp exchanges that accomplished nothing except making the Council look patient while making the humans look defiant. The Council had eventually lost its patience entirely, which was what brought my fleet to the edge of human space in the first place. We had been dispatched to deliver a final message. The humans would recognize Council authority over all disputed transit lanes, submit their territorial claims for formal review, and allow Council inspectors access to their military installations within 60 standard days. If they refused, we would provide a demonstration of what Council authority actually looked like when it stopped being diplomatic. We had arrived at our staging position 4 days earlier. We had sent the message. We had received no reply. And now something was coming down the Verath corridor toward us. Something that our scanners could not properly read. Something that was broadcasting a human identification signal. "One vessel?" I asked. "As far as we can determine," Dresch said. "The sensor interference is significant." "They sent one vessel," said one of the junior officers from across the bridge. He sounded as though he were trying to convince himself that this was reassuring rather than strange. Admiral Vell clasped his hands in front of him now and looked at the blinking point on the map for a long moment without speaking. "Wake the fleet," he said at last. "All stations to readiness. I want full tactical displays on every ship in the formation." "Are we concerned?" asked Commander Dresch, and the way he asked it made clear that he wanted the Admiral to say no. Admiral Vell looked at me instead of answering him. 27 warships, I said. Full battle formation. 3 carrier class, 8 destroyer class. The rest cruisers and support vessels. We have more firepower in this corridor than was used in the entire Keleth suppression. "I know," the Admiral said. "1 human ship," I added. "I know," he said again. He looked at the map for another moment. "Wake the fleet," he repeated, and turned back to the tactical display. I went to my station and began working through the readiness reports as they came in from ship after ship. 27 vessels coming awake in the dark of space. Weapons charging, shields rising, crews taking their positions. The pride of the Council's enforcement capability, assembled in one place for the sole purpose of reminding a small and stubborn species where it stood in the order of things. I remember thinking, as I read through the reports and watched the blinking light continue its slow approach down the Verath corridor, that this would be simple. The humans were clever, yes. The stories about them were entertaining, but cleverness was not armor, and stubbornness was not a weapon, and one ship, regardless of its size, was still one ship against 27. I remember thinking that this would be over quickly. I also remember the voice of my old instructor at the academy, a weathered veteran of 3 different campaigns, whose name I will not write here because she would not have wanted me to. She had a habit of pausing in the middle of a lesson and saying something that seemed to have no connection to whatever she had been teaching moments before. The students learned eventually to write those moments down. The last time I saw her, years after I had left the academy and made my reputation in the field, she had looked at me across a table in a small officer's mess and said something I had not understood at the time. "The most dangerous enemy," she had said, "is not the one who fights you with everything they have, the moment you arrive. The most dangerous enemy is the one who waits, the one who watches you for years and says nothing and builds something in the silence that you cannot imagine. When that enemy finally moves, it is not because they have been pushed beyond endurance, it is because they have finished." I had nodded politely and thought that she was becoming philosophical in her old age. Standing on the bridge of my flagship with 26 other warships arrayed behind me, and one unknown vessel approaching through the dark, I thought about those words for the first time since she had spoken them. I pushed the thought away. I had a fleet to prepare. The human ship continued to approach. And somewhere in the silence between the stars, whatever it had been building in those long years of patience was about to introduce itself to us. The first full image we received of the human vessel arrived on our screens 41 minutes after the initial detection. I have reviewed that sensor record many times since the events described here. I have looked at the numbers, the dimensional readings, the mass estimates, the energy output calculations, I have read the technical analyses produced by some of the finest scientific minds the Council employed, and I will tell you honestly that none of those documents, however thorough, however precise, manages to convey what it actually felt like to stand on the bridge of my flagship and watch that image resolve from noise into shape. The human vessel was not merely large. Large is a word that loses meaning very quickly at the scale of space. Everything in space is large. Stars are large. Nebulae are large. The emptiness between galaxies is large in a way that makes the human mind simply stop processing the number and file it away as something theoretical. So when people use the word large to describe a warship, they are usually working on a more human scale of comparison. Large compared to a transport vessel. Large compared to a standard cruiser. Large compared to the other things they are used to seeing. The human vessel required a different frame of reference. Our largest carrier-class ship, the pride of the Council's enforcement fleet, stretched to just under 900 meters in length. By any reasonable measure, that was an enormous warship. It carried 300 crew members, 24 support craft, and enough firepower to reduce a planetary surface installation to rubble from high orbit. When the Council wanted to make a point about power, it sent carrier-class ships. They were the point. The object coming down the Verath corridor was, according to our sensor readings, somewhere between 12 and 15 times that length. I looked at that number when Dresch read it out from his station. Then I looked at him. Then I looked at the number again. "Confirm that reading," I said. "Confirmed on 4 separate sensor arrays," he replied. He paused. "The mass estimate is even more difficult to process. The instruments keep returning the same figure, and our systems keep flagging it as a sensor error." "What is the figure?" He told me. The bridge went quiet. For a moment, nobody said anything. The only sounds were the soft hum of our own ship's systems and the distant, rhythmic tone of the tactical display cycling through its updates. Admiral Vell, who had remained at the center of the bridge through all of this, stood very still and stared at the numbers on the primary screen. When he finally spoke, his voice was completely level, which I recognized by then as the particular stillness he adopted when he was working very hard to keep his composure. "Their propulsion system," he said. "Can we analyze it?" Our chief science officer, a precise and careful analyst named Verath Ken, looked up from her secondary console with an expression I had never seen on her face before. She was someone who had spent her career reducing complicated things to clear, manageable explanations. She looked, at this moment, as though the universe had handed her something she could not reduce. "Their propulsion output is consistent with a drive system approximately 40 times more efficient than our best current technology," she said. "That is not possible," said Commander Dresch. "No," she agreed. "It is not consistent with anything in our records on human technological development. The last comprehensive assessment we have of their drive technology dates to 6 years ago. This represents a generational leap beyond that assessment." "In 6 years?" Dresch said. "In whatever time they had," she replied simply. I was watching the image on the main screen as they spoke. The vessel was still distant enough that it appeared as a shape rather than a surface, a massive elongated form that sat against the starfield, like something geological, rather than manufactured. But even at this distance, certain things were visible. The vessel was not rough. It was not crude. Whatever it was made of, the outer surface presented in a way that suggested extreme precision, clean geometries, and a level of engineering refinement that took time and intention and resources on a scale I was still struggling to fully accept. Someone on my crew had thought to pull up our records on human vessel design philosophy, which were now being displayed on a side screen. I glanced at them. Our intelligence files on human military vessels showed things that looked aggressive, utilitarian, and purposeful, ships that prioritized function over elegance, that were clearly built to project force rather than to impress. The vessel in our sensors did not look like those files. It looked like something that had been built with no concern whatsoever for what anyone else thought of it, because the people who built it had long since moved past the point where they needed approval from anyone. I pulled up the communication channel to the fleet. "All ships," I said, "maintain current formation. Weapons to standby. No one fires without my direct order. I want every science and intelligence officer on every ship working on the analysis of this vessel. I want readings on its energy signature, its shield configuration if any, its weapon systems if any are visible, and its crew capacity based on mass and volume estimates. Acknowledgements came back from all 26 other ships. We waited. The vessel continued its approach. It did not accelerate. It did not slow down. It moved with the unhurried certainty of something that had decided where it was going, and was simply going there. Admiral Vell came to stand beside me. He was a tall figure, and he kept his eyes on the main screen as he spoke to me quietly so that only I could hear. "In your years in the field," he said, "have you ever encountered anything that made you genuinely uncertain about the outcome of an engagement before it began?" "Once," I said. "Tell me." "The Harith campaign," I said. "When we engaged the Harith Defense Network for the first time and discovered that their automated systems were linked in a way we had not anticipated. For about 11 minutes, I was not sure how it was going to end." "How did it end?" "We won," I said, "as we always do." He nodded slowly. "And before those 11 minutes?" he asked. "I was confident," I said. "And now?" I looked at the image on the screen. The shape, the size, the complete and total silence from its end of the communication spectrum. The humans had not hailed us. They had not broadcast a warning. They had not performed any of the standard diplomatic gestures that all spacefaring species used when approaching a military formation. They were simply coming, steadily, calmly, at their own pace, with no apparent interest in announcing themselves or explaining their intentions. "Ask me again in 11 minutes, I said. He looked at me. I kept my eyes on the screen. The reports from our science teams began coming in. Energy readings from the vessel were extraordinary. Power outputs that our instruments registered with the same confused consistency they had shown on the mass readings. Figures that kept appearing on our screens and being flagged as errors and then being confirmed. Whatever was powering this vessel was operating on a scale that made our own reactors look like campfires next to a star. No visible weapons were detected, which was either reassuring or deeply not reassuring, depending on whether you believed that was because the vessel had no weapons or because the weapons it carried were not the kind that required exterior mounting. Our chief tactical analyst, an officer named Petrev San who had made his name designing multi-ship engagement strategies, was working through a series of calculations at his station. I watched him work for a moment, watched the way his hands slowed and then stopped, watched him stare at the screen in front of him, with an expression I had not seen on his face in 15 years of working together. "San," I said. He looked up. "What are you calculating?" I asked. He chose his words carefully. "I was calculating engagement scenarios," he said. "Optimal firing patterns for our fleet against a single large target. Distribution of firepower to maximize probability of disabling their propulsion, and then their weapons." Zand. Another pause. He glanced at the mass and energy readings on his screen, then back at me. "The calculation assumes that our weapons will have a meaningful effect on the target," he said. "I am finding it difficult to complete the calculation because I cannot determine what level of effect our weapons will actually produce." The bridge was quiet again. Outside, through the dark and the cold, and the 11 light minutes of space between us, the human vessel kept coming. It had not changed course by a single degree. It had not altered its speed. It did not appear to have noticed us at all. Or it had noticed us perfectly well, and noticing us made no difference to it whatsoever. Admiral Vell turned to me. His amber eyes were steady, but something moved behind them that I recognized, not as fear exactly, but as the particular weight that settles on a commander when he understands that the moment he is standing in is the kind of moment that determines everything that comes after. "Open a hailing frequency," he said. I did. The channel opened to silence. 27 warships of the Council's finest fleet, assembled in perfect battle formation, weapons charged, shields raised, all of our power and authority and history aimed at a single approaching vessel, waiting for it to respond. The silence continued, and then, from across 11 light minutes of empty space, something answered. Not words, not a signal. The human vessel changed its configuration. Our sensors erupted with new data, readings cascading across every screen on the bridge simultaneously. Along the outer surface of the massive vessel, Structures that had appeared to be part of the hull itself were moving, separating, extending into forms that our analysis systems began cataloging at a frantic pace. Weapons. Not the exterior-mounted turrets and missile arrays that all warships used as a matter of standard design. These were things that our database had no category for. Things that our instruments measured, and kept returning incomplete analyses on, because the instruments had not been designed to measure weapons of that type. Petrev-san stood up from his station. He stood up because he could not sit still and look at those readings at the same time. He stood with his hands at his sides, and looked at the main screen, and then at me. And what he said next was something I have thought about every day since. "Sir," he said quietly, "I do not think they sent this ship to fight us." I looked at him. "Then why did they send it?" I asked. He looked back at the screen, at the shape, at the readings, at the weapons extending from a vessel the size of a small moon, moving through the dark toward 27 of the most powerful warships the Council had ever assembled, with the patience of something that had already decided how this was going to end. "I think," San said, "they sent it to show us something. The silence between stars is absolute. It does not care about rank or authority or the accumulated weight of Council history. It does not adjust itself for the comfort of those moving through it. It simply is, and everything that happens within it happens on its own terms." The human vessel crossed into close engagement range 47 minutes after we first received a clear image of it. It had still not responded to a single hail. I had been sending on every frequency we possessed for the better part of an hour. Standard Council diplomatic protocols, military identification broadcasts, open channel requests for communication, basic mathematical sequences used as universal first contact signals, and finally, in the last 20 minutes before the vessel reached engagement range, a simple repeating message in the 3 most widely used trading languages in the galaxy, asking the vessel to state its intentions. Nothing. The human ship moved through all of that silence, as if it did not exist. Admiral Vell had called a command conference for the senior officers of the 3 carrier-class ships, conducted over secure channel, rather than in person. I had attended from my own bridge while my crew worked around me. The conference had been brief, and had arrived at the conclusion that any officer with 20 years of experience would eventually reach when faced with an unresponsive vessel of hostile potential approaching a protected formation. We would challenge it, formally, on the record, with full documentation of every warning given, and if it did not respond to the challenge, we would act. The challenge was issued at standard range, official Council military language, translated into every known human language our database contained. The vessel was instructed to halt, identify itself fully, state its mission and authorization, and wait for Council inspection before proceeding further. I watched the words leave our transmitter and travel outward at the speed of light toward the approaching shape. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe that this was the point at which things would change, that the humans, having made their demonstration of scale, having shown us the extraordinary thing they had apparently built in the silence of their quarantine years, would now do the sensible thing. They would talk. They would negotiate from their new position of evident technological advancement. They would extract whatever concessions they wanted from the Council through diplomacy, rather than confrontation, and we would all go home with a new understanding of where humanity actually stood, and the galaxy would adjust, as it always adjusted, to new information. They did not respond to the challenge. The vessel simply kept coming. Admiral Vell gave the order. Every ship in our formation opened fire simultaneously. 27 warships. The full coordinated strike capacity of a fleet that had subdued entire systems. Energy weapons, kinetic rounds, disruption fields. Everything we had, all of it aimed at one target in a single opening strike, designed to be overwhelming, before the target had any chance to respond. What happened next took approximately 6 seconds. I watched our weapons reach the human vessel and interact with its outer surface in ways that our visual sensors recorded perfectly clearly and that my mind took considerably longer to process. The energy weapons reached the hull first. They hit and spread and dissipated. Not absorbed exactly, not deflected exactly. They simply stopped being damaging at the surface and became something else. Some form of radiant output that bled away from the hull in directions that did not correspond to any reflection pattern we used. The kinetic rounds hit next. They hit a region of space approximately 30 meters from the hull and stopped. Not the hull itself. The space around the hull. Something was there that was not visible, and that our instruments had not detected, because our instruments had not thought to look for that particular type of barrier at that particular distance from the surface. The disruption fields were last. They were our most sophisticated weapon type, technology that had been developed specifically to overcome energy shielding systems used by resistant species throughout the Council's history. They had never fully failed against any shielding system they had been tested against. They failed completely against whatever surrounded the human vessel. 6 seconds. The human ship emerged from our entire opening strike without a visible mark on it. And then it answered us. I will not attempt to describe the technical specifications of what the human vessel did next, because I do not fully understand them, and I would not do them justice. What I can describe is the effect. The lead destroyer of our formation, a ship I had served on 14 years earlier, a vessel with a crew of 80 officers, and a service record that included 11 successful enforcement actions, was no longer capable of independent movement within 3 seconds of the human vessel's response. Not destroyed, just stopped, as if the systems that made it move and fight had been carefully and precisely turned off from the outside. I had time to register this. I had time to see the readings on that ship go from active to silent in the space between one breath and the next. I had time to understand that what I was seeing was not what we had expected at all. We had expected a fight. The humans had apparently decided this was something else entirely. My second command call of that engagement was the same as my first. All ships maintain formation. But even as I said it, the readings on my tactical display were changing. Not in ways that suggested our formation was under coordinated assault, in ways that suggested something was moving through our formation, with surgical intention, touching each ship in turn and leaving it unchanged in almost every way, except for the one way that mattered. The ability to fight. Petrev San was at his station, and his voice was very quiet when he spoke. They are not targeting our crew, he said. They are targeting our systems, weapons arrays, primary drive cores, shield generators, in sequence, in order. In order of what? I asked. In order, he said, of which systems would need to be disabled to make each ship completely unable to engage in combat while leaving everything else intact. I understood what he was telling me. The human vessel was not fighting our fleet. It was dismantling it, carefully, methodically, with a level of precision that required knowing exactly what each of our ships was made of, and exactly which components needed to be addressed to render it harmless. That kind of precision required more than a powerful weapon. It required intelligence. Detailed, specific, accurate intelligence about every vessel in our fleet, every system, every weakness. The humans had not come unprepared. They had come knowing exactly what they were walking into, and they had come anyway, with one ship, because one ship was what they had calculated they needed. The engagement lasted 19 minutes. In those 19 minutes, I watched the finest fleet the Council had assembled in a generation be reduced to silence one ship at a time, not to wreckage, not to loss of life, to complete tactical impotence, each vessel left intact and habitable, but stripped of every capability that made it a weapon. My own ship was the last. I think that was intentional. I think they wanted me to watch all of it before they got to me. When they did get to me, it happened in the space of 4 seconds. One moment, I had a bridge full of active systems and a crew at their stations doing everything they could with instruments that were providing information faster than anyone could act on it. The next moment, every tactical display on my bridge went dark simultaneously. The weapons went offline. The shields dropped. The drive fell to emergency standby. The lights stayed on. Life support continued. Internal communications remained active. Navigation still functioned, technically, though there was nowhere useful to navigate to. We were alive. We were whole. We were completely helpless. And outside, the human vessel hung in space, among the debris of our fleet's dignity, and it waited. It was waiting for something specific. I understood that instinctively. It had come with a purpose beyond the tactical demonstration we had just experienced, and that purpose was not yet complete. I sat in my chair in the silence of my disabled bridge, and I thought about my old instructor, and what she had said about the most dangerous enemy being the one who waits. I thought about how right she had been, and how completely I had failed to truly hear her. Then the human vessel opened a channel. Just one. Directly to my ship. Directly to my bridge. Addressed to my specific command frequency, in a way that required knowing our internal communications architecture. They knew our ships. They knew them in detail. The voice that came through the channel was calm, not cold, not triumphant, not the voice of someone savoring a victory. It was the voice of someone delivering information that needed to be delivered, and not enjoying the necessity of it. It belonged to a man. He identified himself simply with a name and a rank. His name was Captain Owen Reeves, of the vessel Unbroken. He did not describe the vessel or explain what it was. He did not need to. He spoke clearly and without decoration. "I am sorry that this was necessary," he said. "I want you to understand that. Nobody wanted this outcome, and the people who sent me here would have preferred to never send me at all." He paused. "Your fleet is intact. Your crews are unharmed. Your ships can be repaired. This was a choice we made deliberately, because the alternative choices were not ones we were willing to make." Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice was the same, but something in the weight of it shifted. "The Council has been operating under a specific assumption about humanity for a long time," he said. "That assumption was that we are a young species, a limited species, a species that could be managed and directed and pressured into compliance, because the costs of resistance would be too high for us to bear. I need you to understand something clearly." I was leaning forward in my chair. The bridge around me was silent. Every officer who could still hear was listening. "We made a choice 22 years ago," Owen Reeves said, "when the Council first began extending its authority into regions of space near our territory. We made a choice about what we were going to do with the time we were given. We did not spend that time protesting, or diplomating, or sending delegations. We spent it building." He let that word sit in the channel for a moment. "What you encountered today is not our full capability. It is not even a significant portion of our full capability. It is what we determined was the appropriate response to the fleet the Council sent. We scaled our response to your force with the specific intention of leaving you with a clear and undamaged record of what happened here, because you need to take that record back to the Council." Another pause. "The message is simple. The territories we have claimed are ours. The transit lanes we have established are ours. The people who live in our systems are under our protection, and that protection is not a negotiating position. We are not asking the Council to accept this. We are informing the Council of it." I heard him breathe once. Just once. "We have no interest in conflict. We have no interest in expansion beyond what we have already established. We have no interest in the Council's internal politics, or its relationships with the species it governs. What happens inside Council space is not our concern. What happens inside human space is not the Council's concern." A silence that lasted several seconds. "Take your fleet home," he said. "Take this record with you. And please make sure the people who sent you understand that we are not the species they thought we were. We have not been that species for a long time." The channel closed. Outside my viewport, in the dark between the stars, the human vessel called Unbroken sat motionless and vast and patient, as if it had all the time in the galaxy, because perhaps it did. I sat in my chair for a long time. Then I turned to Commander Dresch. "Begin repair assessments on all ships," I said, "and prepare a full record of this engagement for transmission to the Council. Every sensor reading, every communication, every second of it." "Yes, sir," he said. His voice was very quiet. "And Dresch," I said. He looked at me. "Flag it for the highest priority review level," I said. "Make sure they understand this is not a report of a failure. It is a warning, and it is a warning we should be grateful they gave us." He nodded and turned back to his station. I looked out at the vessel that had done what nothing in my 19 years of service had ever done. Not hurt us, not humiliated us, exactly, but taught us something we had needed to learn with a patience and precision that was, in its own way, more impressive than anything the technology had shown me. They had built this ship in 22 years of silence. They had built it while the Council assumed they were doing nothing of consequence. They had built it and waited until the moment it was needed and then sent it alone, because one was enough, and they knew it was enough, because they had done the math. and the math was the kind of math you could only do if you understood both sides of the equation perfectly. I thought about the word my instructor had used: finished. The humans had not been provoked into action. They had not been pushed past a breaking point. They had waited until they were finished building what they intended to build, and then they had responded. Not to the ultimatum we had delivered 4 days ago, not to the 14 months of diplomatic pressure before that. They had responded to the decision the Council had made 22 years ago, when it had looked at a young species in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy and decided that what it saw was something small. The repair drones from our surviving support vessel began the long work of restoring our ships to functionality. It would take days. The Unbroken watched it happen from a distance, maintaining its position, not interfering, not communicating further, just present, just there, just a reminder. I wrote the first lines of my report in my head while I waited. I thought about how to explain what I had seen to people who had not seen it. I thought about how to convey not just the tactical facts but the feeling of it, the specific quality of the experience of understanding partway through 19 minutes that you were not in a battle but in a lesson. The hardest part to explain, I decided, would not be the size of the vessel, or the sophistication of its weapons, or the speed with which it had rendered our fleet harmless. Those things were extraordinary, but they were things that data could convey. Numbers could carry that weight. The hardest part to explain would be the silence. The human ship's silence during our entire approach and challenge and warning. The silence that was not communication failure, or technical limitation, or diplomatic error. The silence that was a choice. The choice of something that had no need to announce itself, no need to threaten or posture or explain, before the moment when explanation became genuinely useful. The silence of something that had been finished for a while. The silence of something that had been waiting for us to make the mistake of coming. I sent the preliminary transmission to the Council. Then I sat back and looked out at the stars, at the wreckage of our fleet's confidence drifting among them, at the massive and patient shape of the vessel that had done this with what appeared to be routine competence. And I thought, whatever we thought the galaxy looked like before today, it looks different now. It looks different, because somewhere in the quiet, and the dark, and the years we were not watching, someone was counting the cost of every slight, and every assumption, and every dismissive word spoken about them in council chambers. And they were building the answer. And they had finished. And now the rest of us were going to have to learn to live in the galaxy that answer had made. I did not know yet whether that galaxy was going to be better or worse than the one we had occupied yesterday. I did not know what the council would decide, or how the member species would react, or what the next years would look like in the corridors of power where these decisions were ultimately made. What I knew, with complete and unshakable certainty, was that nothing was going to go back to what it had been. The humans had made sure of that, with one ship, on a Tuesday, in 19 minutes, and they had not even looked particularly interested in the outcome. That, more than anything else, was the part that would stay with me, not the power of what they had brought, not the precision of what they had done, the indifference of it, the calm, unhurried, completely unbothered quality of a people who had decided a long time ago that they were going to be ready, and had gotten ready, and were now simply living in the world that readiness had made. We had come to teach them where they stood. They had shown us where they stood. They were standing exactly where they had decided to stand, and no fleet in the galaxy was going to move them,